I want to
Okay.
start with you arrived in Asheville. Tell us actually how you even got to North Carolina and your initial connection to the community and how people live there and what it's like culturally, and help us understand before we go into what's happened more recently.
Sure, sure. Getting to my journey to Asheville, it was long in the making.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
actually started my senior year of high school. I had visited my cousins in Arkansas. Two of
Yeah.
them were rafting guides on the Pigeon River, which is
Oh,
on
wow.
the Tennessee, North Carolina border. I came
Yeah.
over with my 10-year-old cousin. I drove from Arkansas to Pigeon Forge, spent 2 weeks riding the river every day, spent a weekend touring and cruising around Asheville, maybe
Yeah.
for one night, fell in love. Fast forward 15 years later,
Yeah.
I'm finishing medical school, maybe 10 years later, but finishing
Where were
medical
you?
school.
You were in Louisiana at the
I
time?
was in Louisiana. So
Yeah.
after that, I do LSU undergrad, LSU
Yeah.
medical school, LSU residency. And my future wife was in North Carolina,
Yeah.
and I was finishing up in Louisiana. And I applied for jobs all around the state, but wound up taking a job in Asheville in 2005, 4 weeks before Katrina hit.
Wow. Did you go
Mhm.
back when Katrina hit? Did you go back to Louisiana to
Not
help?
for a good year. No, I did not
Yeah,
do
I
the
didn't either.
they
Yeah,
sent everybody up. Matter of fact, a huge exodus of New Orleanians moved to Asheville in the months
yeah.
after the storm. My daughter's
Wow.
pediatrician was a New Orleans transplant.
So when you get to Asheville, were you partnered right away with Trom, or were you single at
Uh,
first? I can't
I was
remember.
single. We were not married
Yeah,
yet. She still had a year, 2 years left on her residency and fellowship. And
yeah,
so in 2007, we moved back to Louisiana because the job
yeah,
that she wanted or had trained for was not available in Asheville. We moved back. We married in October.
yeah.
And in December of 2007, just 2 months later, I got a call from my partner in Asheville that said the job Traub wanted was open.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
it was in that moment that we really made the decision that we wanted to raise our kids in the mountains,
Ye
away from the life we had grown up with. She
yeah,
still had family in New Orleans. I still had family in New Orleans. And
yeah,
we made the tough decision to raise them in a different community. It was,
yeah,
to me, it was everything Asheville had to offer that wasn't
yeah.
available down there.
Tell us more about that. Yeah, what drives what
Yeah.
Asheville has to offer?
It's the outdoors for sure.
Yeah,
People
yeah.
come here for the beauty of the surrounding nature. The town has a quaint feel to it, but it doesn't
It
have any
does.
of the amenities, the culture, the music. It has it, but not on the level that New Orleans has it for sure. But yeah, I came here to be outdoors in nature and have not regretted it. I also
Yeah.
came here to escape a little bit of the institution of out drinking in New Orleans, the
Yes,
partying, the all nights.
for
Yeah.
sure. Did you always have that connection to nature? I know you and I grew up outside, and we'll talk about that later. But
Hmm.
did you always have that deeper seated like connection to outdoor trekking and like hiking early
I
on that
did. We
kind
had
of
the
attracted
farm.
you? Yeah.
We had our farm in
Yeah.
Mississippi. Now that was
Yeah.
mostly deer hunting and stuff, but yes, it was outdoors. It was me and my buddies pitching a
Yeah.
tent and sleeping outside, and so definitely enjoyed the outdoors. I went to camp in Country Lad in Tennessee for a month every summer with all
Yes.
my friends. So definitely grew up canoeing, those types of activities. So yes.
Yeah. And then when you got there, was it easy to get involved in that world? Did you have a balance between, life outside and I mean, you're a young doctor. I
Mhm.
have to imagine you're working a ton, and your first
Mhm.
home was in the mountains. This home
Mhm.
that you're in now with your kids is his second home, right? That you've
Correct.
had?
This is
Yep.
down in the valley. We outgrew the first home, but absolutely easy to get into. My career was roughly 7 days on, 7 days off.
Okay.
And so I would work really hard for a week and then I would play for a week. And I spent those
Yeah.
first 2 years just exploring everywhere I could explore. Got myself a half decent mountain bike
Yeah.
and yeah,
And a
uh,
dog.
and a dog. I had two
A
dogs, three
lab.
dogs,
Yeah,
but
2
eventually,
dogs.
yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah.
What were the people like, and what are the people like? What's the
Oh,
culture of
wonderful.
does everybody know each other?
Not to the extent the way we grew up in our
Yeah.
hometown. I think that
Yeah.
has changed permanently in most communities around the country. There's certainly still pockets of neighborhoods that are like Brock and Bro, but
Yeah.
in the mountains, everything's much more rural. I lived in a very rural community. Our immediate group of neighbors were all tied together by an HOA, so involved on that level for sure. But
Yeah.
definitely people helping people out. My first few winters being from New Orleans had little knowledge of what to expect, how to freeze
Yeah.
proof your pipes. And so definitely received a lot of counseling education from the mountain men that lived up
Yes.
there. And the community was great. It was, talk about luck of the draw. I moved to Asheville from New Orleans, and my next door neighbor's dog got loose one day. I find him. I call the phone
Yeah.
number. He tells me, nah, don't worry. I went out of town for 2 days. He's got enough food and water. Just let him roam. So I take care
Did
of the
you have
dog.
déjà vu?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I love the dogs didn't have fences where I first
Yeah, that's how
lived.
we grew up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he gets back home and he's a widespread Panic fan. He's an Alabama
Yeah.
fan. We have immediate things to connect us right off the bat. And he's still one of my best friends in Asheville.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's so cool. I love
19
moments
years
like
later.
that. Meant to be 19 years
Meant to
ago.
be. Yep.
So did you have a sense when Helene was coming, when the storm was coming, is this part of the culture with Asheville to like prepare for a storm like we did growing up? Okay, so tell
No,
us, you get the
no.
news and you're in your community, you have your HOA, you have your connection to your
Yeah.
enclave. So did you feel prepared? Were people surprised? Were there warnings?
It's funny. There were definitely warnings,
Yeah.
but I think you could tie some similarities to Hurricane Katrina. Because if
Yeah.
you remember, I mean, 72 hours out, there were plenty of warnings, but it was only within the last 24 hours that it swelled up to the Cat 5
Totally.
and caught New Orleans by surprise. Obviously, the levee failure was its own thing, but
Yeah.
I would say it was the same here. There was definitely 3 days heads up. Storm is coming
Yeah.
through, heavy rains. They did talk about the weather sort of parking over us for a full 24 hours.
Yeah.
And Thursday evening, the first band of weather came through. And no, we knew it was coming, but we were not at all prepared
Yeah.
for the volume of water that was going to come through the creeks and the streams. My wife and I, we actually got haircuts and took the kids to dinner that evening and both
Yeah.
went home on nearly empty gas tanks in our cars.
Yeah.
I mean, the
Yeah.
simple stuff. And, we did survive. I would not say that what we did was irrational, but no, we did not
Yeah.
prepare. We did
And
not.
did it rain all that night? Like, did you wake up to it flooding?
Yes, so we knew the first band was going to come. There was going to be a break. We put the kids to bed that evening, thinking that they had school on Friday morning. At 4:15 a.m. or so, our generator kicked on. We have a whole home propane automatic start generator. It fires up, so I know the electricity's gone out in the neighborhood. Sleep for another hour, wake up, and at 6:15, 6:30, I left the house in my car because my neighborhood has to cross a 80-foot single lane steel girdered bridge. Been
Yeah.
there for what, 40, 50 years probably. And I wanted to see if my wife could get out for work.
Yeah.
And in previous heavy rains, the fields out where my bridge are have flooded multiple times over the last 10 plus years I've lived in this home. So it's not unusual to see water outside the creek in these expansive fields that are right along Cane Creek. But
Uh-huh.
when I got to the bridge, there was 2 feet of water on the roadway leading up to the bridge, which I had never seen before in all
Yeah.
the previous floods. And so I stopped my car. I walked up towards the bridge, realizing I was in a current of 8-10 inch deep water. And I
Yeah.
was like, if it's this deep here, I know it's 36 inches of water on the far side of the bridge. And there's no way my wife's getting to work through this bridge.
Yeah.
So I drive home, and the morning was very chaotic. I get home and at 7 a.m. And prior to leaving, I had checked on my basement
Yeah.
downstairs. I get home and my wife says, You need to check on the basement. It looks like it's flooding outside. And so I go down, and in only the half hour I was gone,
Yeah.
I now have a inch of water in not my finished basement, but an unfinished portion that had a
Yeah.
garage door to the elements. Oh, wow. So, so
Yeah.
we
You're
start,
realizing. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's happening. And so we're
Yeah.
cleaning that out. And quite immediately, a neighbor comes and knocks on our door at now 8:30 a.m.
Yeah.
and says, "Can you come to my house? My wife fell while walking the dogs, and I think she's hurt her wrist."
Yeah.
I'm the doctor in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so I give the mop to my wife. She starts cleaning out the basement.
Yeah. I love that
And
image.
so I walk down to my neighbor's house,
Yeah.
and his wife is sitting in the living room chair with her wrist already in a cock up
Oh.
splint that her
Yeah.
husband had prepared.
Yeah.
And I touch her fingers, they were cold. She had cap refill, but it wasn't super reassuring. And I didn't even remove the splint. I just kind of gently touched her hand, and she, lit up off the chair.
Yeah.
And my
Yeah.
immediate thought is, I'm not an orthopedist. I
Right.
don't know. I know you need an x-ray. It's probably broken.
Yeah.
I'm not reassured by, these cold white fingertips. We need to get you a
Yeah.
doctor ASAP. So me and the husband get in the car. Mind you, it's been 2.5 hours now since I first went to the bridge.
Yeah.
And we drive out at maybe, it's 10:30-ish a.m., so maybe a little longer. And we get to the road leaving our neighborhood, and there are not one, two, or three, but there are 5 80-foot tall trees down
Yeah.
across the road,
Oh, wow.
70-inch around trunks,
Yeah.
right where I had parked my car to get out and walk through the water to see if the bridge was open. Like,
Yeah.
the timing of it, I could have been crushed by
So
one of the
fast.
trees where my car
Yeah.
was parked. And at that time, there were already 2 neighbors with chainsaws. The rain is at this point letting up. The storm is over. The sun is starting to come out. And we walk up to the 2 neighbors who are chainsawing to let them know my neighbor's been injured. We need to get to the ER as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And as we're talking to them, our bridge separates from its foundation
Oh.
and just makes this
Collapses.
creak
Yeah.
sound. And you can see it sort of turn cockeye in the water flow. It was an amazing amount of water that was going
Yeah.
through there.
And the reality of now there's no way out,
No
right? Is
way
there
out
another
through
way out for her?
there is a back way. So there is no way out through
Okay.
that neighborhood. We have had experiences in the past where we've done bridge repair work, where it'd be out for 12,
Yeah.
18 hours, a day or two. And so there is a exit through two private properties, through their
Okay.
driveways, over a hill, around the backside to another road where there's a state bridge. We
Yeah.
don't know if that bridge is good or not at this point. Because mind you, when power went out at 4:15 a.m., cell phones went out. And
Yeah.
when we awoke Friday morning, there was no cell phone. There was
Yeah.
no text messaging. The only way to talk to your neighbors next door was to walk next door and talk to them.
Wow.
And
Isn't that a message for 2024? You
it
actually have
was,
to get
yeah.
out of your
Yeah.
house and go talk to your
Yeah.
neighbor
It
in
was
order
like
to
having your
survive.
mothers on the only landline phone talking to each other for hours, and you had to walk over and find out if you had milk. Yeah, because they weren't going to get off the phone for
Our
you.
our entire childhood.
So true. So
So do
true.
you guys immediately go into problem solving mode? Is there a group dynamic that
Immediately.
emerges? Like, is someone the
Immediately.
leader?
Yeah, I would say it was multiple leaders. We have a neighbor who owns the private driveway that we had to get through. It just so happened that it all worked out because people were out of their homes trying to be part of the
Yeah.
solution rather than part of the problem. This landowner comes up and says, "Hey, can we get out your way? It's flooded on my side." We tell him, "Hey, our bridge just went out. We're not getting out of here for months." And he
Yeah.
says, "All right, let's go over because there's trees on my drive that we're going to have to eventually clear to even get over to see if this other bridge is
Yeah.
available." It wasn't all Chiefs, no Indians,
Yeah.
but it was more of a democratic solution making, everybody chipping in.
Yeah.
It got a little hectic at times. There's one specific memory I have of that day was I got my chainsaw, my kids are there.
Yeah.
There are 6 adult men, all with chainsaws,
Yeah.
all working on this. It was a group of 3 trees, probably. They were 80 feet tall. They had fallen all together in one hot mess. And
Yeah.
all 6 of us are working on it at the same time. And I did stop. I paused and I said to myself, this is too much. Like,
Yeah.
there has to be more organization. So I backed up. I stopped. I
Yeah.
waited for these guys to all finish up. And nobody got hurt. Everybody
Yeah.
did well. But
Yeah.
yes, it was definitely a situation of neighbors helping neighbors, people coming
Yeah.
together, getting, because it was just one step at a time. There wasn't, it was really hard to have a longitudinal plan of what to
Yes.
do. No
Yeah.
text messaging, no alerts from the city. All you knew was what was the next task in front of you.
Yes. When you really can do that, when you can focus on
Yes.
just the task in
Yes.
front of you, it's so gratifying because you're not dealing with all the other
Yeah.
bullshit.
You
Yeah.
don't have to, like, my work. What about my work? It doesn't matter. I
Right.
can't get there until
Yeah.
this tree gets removed. So it does
Yeah.
allow you to get rid of the fluff that stresses you if you're capable of putting
Yeah.
it aside and just
Yeah.
focus on the task at hand.
Yeah. Did you see neighbors step up in unexpected ways, generosity beyond what you had seen in the
Mm-hmm.
past?
100%. We are
Yeah.
a beautiful neighborhood. We're a friendly neighborhood, but we are not a
Yeah.
connected neighborhood in the sense of what I remember. We all
Yeah.
know each other. We don't hold a block party the way we did.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not here to toot my own horn or anything, but being a nucleus type of a person, an
Yes.
Enneagram 2, I throw a
Yeah.
crawfish boil every year. I
Yeah.
invite all the neighbors every
You're
year.
you're
Yes,
relationship oriented, to say the
I am
least. Friends and
for sure.
family. Yeah, rule your life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it hasn't been every year, but over the years,
Yeah.
I've had enough of these crawfish boils where people come, they get together, and they get hang out in a general relaxed sense. And we have a new neighbor that's been doing this as well since the storm. That's had get-togethers.
Oh,
So
that's
it's coming
cool.
up this Sunday, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
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 And so how did you guys get out of the neighborhood? Did you have to go around
Ah,
to one of those other
yes.
properties?
So we had to go through these other properties. We chainsaw through those trees. There was then a mudslide to get through on the
Okay.
other landowner's driveway. And
Yeah.
that required heavy machinery. These
Yeah.
particular neighbors happened to own the heavy machinery that they needed. And
Yeah.
so it began a process of, I think the neighbor put it succinctly when he stated, those people who felt like they weren't doing enough because they could only get a broom and push water out of a basement.
Yeah.
All they could do was something little like remove water or take a broom and clean up some light dirt that
Yeah.
freed other people up to do the bigger things, which then
Yeah.
freed other people up to do the even bigger things. And so he really pointed out how it's like a pyramid where everybody, even if you're doing something little, is helping the person the next rung up the ladder free their time up to do
Yeah.
something that might be a little more broadly beneficial.
Yeah. That really sticks with me because I feel like that's an invitation for all of us, and I often get stressed out that I'm not doing enough. I am also an Enneagram 2, Carter Wood. So, you
Shocker.
know how that goes.
Yeah.
And so my impulse is to give or have the relationship be harmonious and do all the things to please and contribute. And I think sometimes it gets overwhelming because it's like, well, I really can't give that much, whether it's financially or time wise. And so it's easy for people to then withdraw or overthink it or not feel completely like joyous when they're doing it because it's like, it's just this. You
Hmm.
know, so I
Yeah.
think that's I love that your neighbor brought that up because it's so true. Whatever we can contribute on whatever level, it really does connect with what somebody else can give.
Yes.
And so you're all working together. Then how long does it
Hmm.
take for you guys to have
It
a
took
way out
36
of your
hours.
okay, and
36 hours. Yeah. So
Uh,
we were able to get the road cleared enough to the other state road that we could get out from. But on
yeah,
Friday, the day of the storm, the water was too high all the way through that evening to exit. It was an unbelievable volume of water coming
yeah,
down Cane Creek, 8 feet higher than I think I've ever seen it before during previous.
yeah. And no rain. How does it drain? There's no rain for the next few days, I'm assuming? And
Correct.
then you have your natural draining outages in place?
Yes, for
Yeah,
our creek, it drains into the French Broad River. And it was interesting because mountain weather is very common for you to leave your home and it's absolutely storming and cloudy and drive
yeah,
10 miles to your daughter's soccer game and it's a beautiful day. It
yes,
is that is mountain weather. And so these pockets of rain that came down didn't hit the whole area. It hit in
yeah,
different pockets, and whatever watersheds those areas funneled into is where the worst damage was, which is why Swannanoa River took the brunt of the damage and destruction, whereas the French Broad River that runs. It's funny because the French Broad runs south to north through Asheville,
uh-huh, uh-huh,
and everything past the Biltmore Estate was relatively okay. But then
yeah,
where the Swannanoa River funnels into the French Broad and then proceeds through downtown Asheville near the River Arts District,
yeah.
total destruction and devastation.
Wow.
20 feet of water, running river water through these
Yeah,
areas that move buildings off their foundations. And
yeah.
it's,
And I imagine closed all those businesses
oh,
indefinitely. Like, is that area
indefinitely.
ever gonna come back?
There will be somewhat of a shuffling of the deck. I'm not an economist. I'm not in city planning and
Yeah,
all. I do read the paper, I keep up. And I know that New
that's good.
Orleans has
I don't always read the
rebounded.
paper.
But, I mean, it's like this shirt, rebirth, right? I mean,
Yeah,
everything happens for a reason at some level.
yeah,
And through destruction, there can always be rebirth.
yeah,
And I believe that these areas will come back in some fashion. I believe
yeah.
that people have resolve. Even those who don't choose to, they have this will to survive. I think that we're
Yes,
all given on some level.
yes. It's an instinct. I found
Mhm,
that because I lived in New York City during 9/11. Similar to you and when you mentioned earlier about not having the gas tank full even though something's
mhm,
coming. We didn't know 9/11 was coming, obviously, but I was in my apartment and I had the Today Show on and I saw the plane hit, but from the image on the television screen, it just looked like a private plane to me, and that's what a lot of
mhm,
us thought, like, "Oh, it was off course," or whatever, and your mind just doesn't fully process it. And I continued to go throughout my day. I was in graduate school at the time, so I'm like, "I should walk up to Columbia." The subway stopped
mhm.
running, but I didn't think anything of that. I was like, "Oh, okay, the subway's not running. I'll just take a long walk." And
Yeah.
it's like your brain doesn't compute right away how to adjust to, like, the new reality. And then what I found in the days after 9/11, which I'm sure if there are listeners who were there, they would agree with me, it was the most powerful of experience of community that I've ever
Mhm,
experienced.
mhm,
It's people have a will to live. It is natural and instinctual for us to show up for each other. We're hardwired for life. So
mhm,
I agree with you. There is a rebirth and it happens immediately. Even though you're in the aftermath of all that change and heartache, you're watching your small business close its doors indefinitely. And yet there's all these things, there's all these solutions around you and people to meet and collaboration. And I don't know, I find it very inspiring.
absolutely. Yeah.
So who did show up for y'all? Was there I know I was watching the news thinking, "Okay, why isn't Asheville getting more attention?" But we were in a political season, and as I mentioned
Mhm.
earlier, I don't always watch the full news. So
Oh,
maybe there was some
yeah, and,
coverage that I didn't see, but it felt like it happened and we kept moving, which is why I wanted to have you on and learn more about what your experience was. How did people show up right after? And was there help from other organizations?
absolutely, there was help from other organizations in this sense of who showed up. I would definitely say the iHeartRadio station, and maybe
Yeah.
that's a factor of the national news is
Yeah.
too big. It's got too many inputs.
And
There's always
agendas.
something
Yeah.
dramatic happening. It's terrible what happened in Asheville, but the Ukraine war, the Israeli war, you
Uh,
name it. There were other storms. There was a hurricane in Florida just a month later, not even a month later.
yeah.
So that doesn't rub me wrong one way or the other with the national media. But
Yeah.
our local media did show up. And the iHeart radio stations, there's 4 or 5 of them in the Asheville area. I had never listened to them once before the storm,
Yeah.
really. I mean, I take that back. I do listen to WNCW, which is like their WWOZ.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
I love
listen
the
to them.
call signs. Yeah.
Yeah. But they showed up with 24/7
Oh,
on
wow.
air
Yeah.
coverage of people phoning in, whether they be local people once they had cell service or people around the country wanting to check in on local loved ones.
Yes.
And it was amazing. Amazing
Yeah.
what they made happen. People would call in from California saying, "Hey, my grandma over in Black Mountain lives at XYZ Black Mountain Road. I haven't heard from her. Can somebody check on her?" And literally within an hour, 15 people would show up at this woman's home wanting to know if she was
Um,
alive and well and call
yeah.
back into the radio station. And so that mechanism was the glue to keep people's nightmare scenarios tamped down. Where is my loved one? Are they safe?
Yeah.
Or I need this thing. I need a chainsaw because a tree fell across my road and I can't get my car out. Can somebody help me chainsaw this? And it
Yeah.
started the Kiss Country Chainsaw Crew. 5 guys that were not chainsawers before Hurricane Helene. It
Love it so much.
organically occurred over 10 days. These 5
Yeah.
guys would just show up all day long at people's houses and chainsaw trees out of their
It's
driveways.
the best.
Just amazing that
Yeah.
there are people out there. I mean, I think you mentioned earlier, how do I contribute? I can only give a little bit of money or a
Yeah.
little bit of time. And I think to myself, how can I contribute? And then you have these people come along that, I don't know where they are in their personal lives that they can just uproot and come to Asheville for a month to chainsaw trees off of people's houses. The
Totally.
fact that people do that still, it's just keeps me going with what little able I'm going to do. If he did that, the very least I can do is call in, and help a person, which I
It
did.
gives you it's totally like a shot of hope for humanity. It's like
Yeah.
whatever is coming down the pipeline that we have no idea what's happening, how fast our world changes, how unpredictable it is, how much tension there can be. And then you have that. You have like guys show up with chainsaws. You're like,
Yeah.
okay, we're going to be okay.
Right. Yeah.
I did what I could contribute, which is kind of laughable if my husband Boyd listens to this episode, which he may or may not. Sometimes he does and sometimes he doesn't. When all the footage of Hurricane Katrina was on the television, the dogs being trapped on the rooftops is what
Mhm.
really crushed me. But I did not go to New Orleans. I was like, I cannot go in that environment. I feel like I would be more of a problem than part of the solution because I would be anxious, like
Understood. Yeah.
overwhelmed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And emotional. And so we rescued a dog, and he ended up being so in love with that dog, Farley, a German Shepherd mix,
Aw.
but he was not ready for a second dog. And I was like,
Aw.
oh, we're going to go get a second dog because look at the television and all of these stranded dogs. So that my contribution was adding a rescue animal, a local rescue animal to our
Oh.
family. But to this day, he swears that dog is like the number one dog in his heart. So it was meant to
Oh,
be.
that's very sweet. Yeah.
So, did the hospital have much impact around this? Did you see more patients, less patients? Did the hospital community do anything specific? And I'm not even sure where the hospital is in relationship to where all of
Yeah.
the challenge was.
I'll answer that twofold because I have recently transitioned jobs. I went from the large 700 plus bed hospital in town to the VA hospital here in Asheville, which is a smaller operation, but
Yeah.
both of them were affected by power outages, water outages. And so, quite immediately, that's uncomfortable for the patients. You're running on backup power, you don't have your HVACs on, they're handing out little 12-inch fans in the room to try to keep people cool, especially your people with respiratory problems, things like
Yeah.
that, because it was September, late September, early October. So not terribly hot in the mountains, but warm enough. The nursing staff likely had to stay in house for 72 hours, sleeping in rooms, pulling probably longer than their usual 12-hour shifts.
Yeah.
I was not, if I had been working at the time of the storm, I would have been one of those potentially, yeah, sleeping at the facility if I had been able to
Yeah.
get in. However, I was not. That was just the luck of the draw for me. I've mentioned at the top of this, I'm 7 on, 7 off. And so after four
Yeah.
days of doing what I could to get my house in order, I did go back to the hospital for my 7 day stretch, taking care of the patients. Definitely more people in house than needed to be because you couldn't get anybody out. All the brakes got put on discharge planning. And I had one beautiful moment. I had a veteran on my service that was basically, by the time I got to him 4 days after the storm, his acute illness had resolved. He had been ready to go home. He lived in a very small community about 30 miles south of Asheville, unaware if he had water, power, this or that. It turned out that this particular patient knew a friend of mine through his professional work 20, 30 years earlier. I even wound
Mhm.
up doing a selfie with them, sending it to my friend.
Oh,
They talked
yeah.
to each other through my text message because they hadn't communicated in 15 years or more. So established a connection and used the iHeartRadio mechanism
Yeah.
to find out if this veteran's house was in good enough shape for him to go home. Made a phone
Yeah.
call, got somebody to call me directly through the radio station.
Yeah.
And I put those two people, the patient and this person, on the phone together. And it turns out the guy that called me knew my patient's next door neighbor. And they talked about the house and this and
Yeah.
that. And it all worked out. And the patient got to go home knowing that everything was set up.
Yeah. It's just that little extra effort to go and do something extra for somebody, I think is so powerful. And I think one of the reasons I'm moved by it also is because we have the opportunity to do that without a hurricane, without a terrorist attack, without the big event. I think it's just so important to remember when you have a third thing that enters the scene. It's not just you and me, it's the third thing. It
Mhm.
makes people come together in such a beautiful way, and I think so often we forget that the third thing that we have every day anywhere is just the threat of disconnection, the threat that we all face of feeling isolated or alone, which we know is a health problem, which we know is an epidemic in our country. So tell us about your kids. Like, what was your parenting move during this? What did you get them involved? Did you try to protect them from that? Were young people involved?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I try to get them involved. That is harder than you think with
Yeah.
a 10 and a 13
Yeah.
year old, 11 and a 13-year old. Actually
Yeah.
turned 11 technically right after the storm. I try to
Yeah.
parent through quotes, little snippets. So
Yeah.
be part of the solution, not part of the problem was
Yeah.
definitely one of the things I was going with. Getting them out there to do little stuff with brush. For example, my son loves, we have a one wheel, one of those skateboard things called.
Yeah.
So I want him to clear the debris off the road after we did all the chainsawing. So I set him up. He gets the one wheel, he gets the electric blower, and he goes out there and he's blowing the roads off.
Yeah.
Just a brush, and it's small, but it makes things look fresh because look
Yeah.
good, feel good type thing. My belief is the better your community looks, even in the sense of the amount of destruction was overwhelming what was
Yeah.
around us. And so, yes, I encourage my children to get outdoors, to
Yeah.
see what they could do to help other people.
Yeah. And I just think that look good, feel good. It shows that you care about the natural world. Like just the actual environment, I think is so important to revere because like you just lived through, it can change
Yeah.
in a few hours, it can change. How do you feel about witnessing people's resilience? And I know in your life, I know from knowing you and even from this little bit that we've talked about the natural world, actually, that part of the places that you go to feel stronger, to feel resilience in your life is nature. Do you feel that you've witnessed how people rise? I know you work as a doctor. I know a lot of your patients get out of the hospital. You've chosen that aspect of medicine for that reason. You want to see
Mhm.
people healthier and go home. But tell us about, yeah, any experience that you've had either in your own life or just in the community, like as a group watching people rise, watching people be strong.
Sure. Resilience, yeah, it's certainly a big part of life. There
Yeah.
are times where you can choose to be resilient or choose to not be resilient. And certainly, I guess theoretically, this is one of those times. But when you don't have a way to get out of your home and your community, I think there's a lot of us felt like we didn't have a choice. We had to be out, we had to
Yes.
be working, we had to be connected. We didn't have our cell phones to reach out to others for help. And so the resilience of my immediate neighborhood was excellent. It was people
Yeah.
knocking on each other's doors, checking in. Are you doing okay? We do have one neighbor who is a little bit disabled and wasn't going to be able to do all the things he needed to do. And the neighborhood rounded up food deliveries to him while the
Yeah.
power was out and making sure that at least somebody was checking on him 2 or 3 times a day. So, in the immediate sense of my neighborhood, the resiliency was something that we felt we didn't have the choice to do. And we all worked very well together. I
Yeah.
think the community at large has a strong sense of resiliency. This is we're just off the Shenandoah Valley, but these are mountain folk.
Mm,
They've got it in their DNA to live off the grid, off the reservation, and fend for themselves. And the community, the sense of community was very strong. I think where the lack of resiliency comes into all of this is something larger than just a storm, but America
yeah.
has a bunch of creature comforts. We
Yes.
all have
Yes.
things going for us that are better than most people in the world. And so when things don't go well, some people maybe they feel like they have a choice to not be resilient. And I think they turn to complaining. There were a lot of complaints about FEMA not doing enough
Yeah.
fast enough, not being organized enough. And I heard the complaints. I don't agree with them necessarily. I think the whole thing's in the moment of the day in and day out of that first week or two after the storm, there was a
Yeah.
lot of chaos. And even though I heard these murmurings of FEMA this, FEMA that, a FEMA truck showed up at our bridge within 7 days of the storm, I want to say,
Yeah.
and carted off a 80-foot long, 10-foot wide steel girdered bridge that had to have weighed 300 tons.
Yeah.
It took them 3 days to cut it up and haul it off, but I didn't
Yeah.
call FEMA and ask them to do it. They
Right.
just came and did it. And
Right.
so you have to have some patience. You have to give time. You
Yeah.
have to just start with sweeping out your garage and mopping the floors because
Yeah.
you're doing the little things while other people give it time for people to do the bigger things.
Yeah. And it's perspective. We have our ornaments in boxes and we don't have a lot of storage in our house. We use every inch of our home and we have flipped the garage to be Boyd's office. And above his office space is like a enough space for a few boxes. And so I'm climbing up there and as I'm climbing up there and I'm moving all the boxes, I'm thinking to myself, we don't have enough storage. I wish we had a bigger house, or I love our house, but just like
Mhm.
space wise, our ornaments get kind of dusty and crammed in there because it's not like, well, first of all, I'm not super type A organized, but also it's all kind of shoved in there because it's so limited. And as I'm pulling the boxes out and I'm passing them to my daughter, Mimi, she literally says to me, God, we have all these boxes. This is amazing. She's like, you keep all those boxes up there. And she loves our Christmas decorations. And she's like opening the tops to the boxes and she's like, I can't wait to go through all this stuff. I love our ornaments. And it was exactly at the same moment that I was
Yeah.
thinking, it could be nicer. It could be more
Yeah.
organized. Half of our ornaments are like chipped because I haven't wrapped them properly and they're like nice, delicate. Or it's like she loves elephants and we pulled out the elephant and two of the legs are missing. And she's like, no worries. No worries. Let's put the elephant on the tree.
That is so funny.
But it was literally like
Uh,
two
but
perspectives
yeah,
colliding.
it shows you how kids speak the truth.
Yes,
They,
and it shows me how
yeah,
entitled I
yeah,
am in that
yeah.
minute, or just of like,
Kids don't have the baggage that we have from our whole life of
no,
all
and
the
you
different,
who
yeah.
cares, Paige? You do have
Right.
storage. Like, you're
Yeah.
actually clean. That's what you're
Yeah.
doing. You're on a ladder
Yeah.
getting boxes out of storage. It could be a lot worse.
Right. Could be on top of the
So,
car.
I
Yeah.
love bringing that forward because that's all of us.
Yeah.
That's all of us have the opportunity to do that reframe. Where
Mhm.
do you find the strength in your own life because of how relationship oriented you are and how generous and giving? I mean, you have to show up for patients. You work as a physician, which I always think is such a unique path. Is it your faith? Is it nature? I mean, I kind of put those words in your mouth. Is that a part of where you go to restore your faith in humanity or just what you can give, replenish?
So I'll start with saying my family.
Yeah.
More so than my faith, I get a lot of
Yeah.
my recharging my batteries through my family, being a nucleus for a lot of the vacations that we plan and the
Yeah.
organization that goes on. That is a huge factor in my life, both my
Yeah.
immediate family with my wife and kids, but certainly the extended family on her side and mine would be a big part of it. I think my work for sure. Yeah, you
Yeah.
mentioned I'm a physician. I chose hospital medicine. My career has been in more acute care where somebody
Yeah.
comes in with acute medical illness. They spend 3 to 5 days under my care. They're better when they leave. They have more
Yes.
information about their illness. I
Yeah.
send them on the path, hopefully improve. That's the goal at least. So, being Enneagram 2, I receive a tremendous energy boost from
Yeah.
that. Yeah, those two things. And then certainly nature and exercise over the last 5 years or more have been a bigger part of my life than they probably were when I was younger.
Yeah,
Um,
for
I
sure.
have, yeah, I definitely get out when we travel. I exercise before the kids wake up a lot. And so that'd be another huge one for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you cherish about your family of origin? Like when you say family and you say, okay, of course you've built this amazing family because you had a very strong sense of family growing up.
Hmm.
When you think about your Brockenborough days, which is the name of our street, which our
Sure.
listeners might have already picked up
Yeah.
on, our childhood homes, which your family lived for like, what was it, like 40 years before your parents moved to Texas?
Yeah.
Um, what do you cherish about that as a foundation for your life?
Yeah. The beautiful dysfunction. Right?
So
Skeletons out of the
perfectly said.
closet. We are
Yeah.
dysfunctional, right? Aren't we all? Certainly, we talked about resilience earlier and thinking
Yeah.
about the loss of my brother Hunter, who took his own life 8 years ago now.
When I think about what I cherish about being neighbors all those years, especially our mother's deep friendship and love for each other,
Hmm. Hmm.
family connection for sure, but our mothers being very, very dear friends and witnessing how they leaned on each other through some of the harder years of their life was such a foundational relationship in terms of role modeling, like seeing that kind of support. And then I think just the togetherness of it all, like you mentioned earlier, running back and forth to see who has the butter, who has the milk all the time. We were always out of those things and
Always.
just running through the house, nobody knocking.
Yeah.
And the beauty of togetherness, like you're all in this together. And so much of life is like waiting at the airport for a delayed plane. You know, like there's so much
Hmm.
about life that is like boring or annoying or irritating or in your words dysfunctional, like relationships are dysfunctional and what you say to each other, what you don't say to each other, and the history of family and all the things that come out, just the lineage of all those hurts. And then you're just in it together and it's really, really funny. And the dog jumps on the counter and eats the turkey. You know, like, and that's what everybody talks
Yeah.
about for the next 20 years. Can you believe
Sure.
Speckles ate the turkey? Like, that becomes it,
I'm
and
still
it's
waiting
it's
for your
so
mom to publish
beautiful.
that book about Speckles.
Yes, same. Okay, so I'm gonna tell you this one story. Are you ready for it?
Yep.
Okay. So I write a lot in December. I have this big push for gratitude in December, and some of my community joins me, and I do 31 days of gratitude. So I haven't written this out, so I'm sharing this with you because it's a brainstorm that I have. You know how there's a core memory, and that movie Inside Out has kind of made this lingo with my kids.
Favorite movie ever.
Oh, good. So you know it. Okay. So the teenagers now will say core. I'm sure your kids say, oh, that's core memory. And I've really been thinking about that because we are the same age. And I'm noticing that my memory is getting a little fuzzy here and there. And I'm starting to notice that there are just these kind of anchored memories that I return to. And I'm starting in my own mind to call them container memories. And this is what I want to
Hmm.
write about because they contain a multitude of moments that become who you are. And I have this one container memory that I've never shared with you because it just came to my mind. It was a very private moment about your mom. And we had gotten balloons for your birthday. And I had gone down to your house. We were very, very young. So you are a year older than me. It could have been like you were 6 and I was 5. I mean, it's a super early memory. And I was so excited for the balloons. And your mom gave me a balloon to hold. And I was on the front porch and I let it go. And I was so sad. And so instead of dealing with my shame and sadness, I started running home. And she was very calm. Your mom taught kindergarten, so she knows what to do with a young person. But I have a visceral, like, I was just overwhelmed with watching this balloon that was going to be for you go up into the sky because I just either felt like letting it go, or I don't know, kids are weird, or let it go without thinking about it.
Didn't even know it was going to float. Yeah.
Yes, and she found me on our front porch, and she really kneeled down, and she really looked at me, and she was like, "This is not a problem. This I love you. Do not worry about it." It
Yeah.
just warms my heart that it's not just about communities coming together for each other as adults. It's really for the old people and the young people on either end, and
Hmm.
that we were raised in a community where adults really showed up for children
Hmm.
and for each other in those more vulnerable moments. And that one little moment with your mom contains so much more about how supported I felt
Hmm.
in Old Metairie, all of the families around us, all of the parents who cared, and all the neighbors who showed up for each other. And that is possible. That is possible in 2024. It is possible when we have cell phones in our hands. It's possible when we have robots working, which is not that far off. It's possible
Hmm.
because it's human. It's just our nature. So I thought you would
Absolutely.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm sure you were fine without your red
I
balloon, by the
can,
way. You're doing
yeah,
fine.
yeah,
You've
I
gone
think I
on
was
to have a
doing
very
okay.
good life. I
Yeah.
hope it hasn't come up in therapy.
I can mirror your container memory with Daddy Bob stopping me on that old yellow moped. We had brought it down from the farm. We had it on Brocken
Yeah.
Grow, and I was riding it up and down the street at not much older than what you're, 7, 8 years
Yeah.
old, and wearing no helmet. And Daddy
Yeah.
Bob stopping me and being like, "Son, you got to go put a helmet on right now."
Yeah.
And I was like,
Sounds like him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and that memory
Yeah.
is why today I look at my children. I'm like, get your helmet on
Yeah.
because it is you learn from the people around you. You were absolutely correct that we were raised not just by our own parents, but our friends' parents, our neighbors'
Yes.
parents. And it was a beautiful thing. And I do think it happens in today's world. I don't think you can tell other people how to parent their children,
Yes.
but if their children are under your purview, you better parent them while they're in front of you if their parents aren't around.
Yeah. And it's a great act of caring. It's
Hmm.
like the ultimate act of caring to be in community like that. But
Absolutely.
I love that. There's hope for all of us. There's hope for the
Yeah,
future.
there is. It's going to be okay.
It's going to be okay.